So the last two sessions we talked about external collaboration in Microsoft 365, right? 2 sessions ago, we did SharePoint, kind of dove a little deeper on SharePoint. Last session, we did Teams. Today is the everything else kitchen sink edition of external collaboration in Microsoft 365. So everything besides SharePoint and Teams, we're gonna drill into a bit here. So as always, the team, our positions, perspectives, etc. We should have judged this slide for pride. I think I missed an opportunity there. Let's flip to. So external collaboration, again, not of the Teams or SharePoint variety. So we'll focus on OneDrive.
So because Microsoft 365 is what it is, there are some new things about SharePoint and Teams in here too.
Oh, cool. Yeah, there's some really new, right? Like just posted today, I believe, by Microsoft. Yep. So Microsoft, 3 other group-driven properties that are part of Microsoft 365 and some Power Platform considerations for external sharing as well. Todd, do you want to start talking OneDrive?
Yeah. So we covered SharePoint a couple of weeks ago, and OneDrive, I mean, it's a separate thing, but it's ostensibly SharePoint with a very specific template and all those kind of things. So a lot of the things that we talked about for SharePoint are applicable to OneDrive, but I did want to point out a couple of things and reiterate them. Is we have those 2 sliders for SharePoint and OneDrive. So you can have different external policies for each of the 2 types of SharePoint and OneDrive. The idea behind that is Microsoft wanted to give us as administrators the ability to not, to control the most permissive thing and not let people sneak past it inside of OneDrive. So like I showed in that image there, SharePoint can be more permissive than OneDrive, but OneDrive cannot be more permissive than SharePoint. And so this is an example of that, where if something is in SharePoint, it can be shared with anybody. That's what the external policy is. But in OneDrive, it can only be shared with existing guests. So that keeps people from squirreling company documents away in their OneDrive and sharing it out to competitors or whatever. So that is one option that you have, is you can control OneDrive and SharePoint separately. The idea being that SharePoint is more easily discovered and potentially has more people. So if there are shenanigans going on, they're more likely to be seen. The things at the bottom there, those are not OneDrive specific. They are SharePoint and OneDrive, but I kind of threw those out there as a primer or refresher on what some of our suggested settings are. So one of them is what is the default, and the default can be anyone, which is a horrible idea. What we would really like the default to be is people with existing access, but that's not an option. So I always pick the most restrictive one, which is specific people. You can change it to anyone, in OneDrive or whatever later on, but I like people take the default. It's the whole nudge principle. So I like that. And then the whole having them expire. So there's some things there. So those are just kind of, best practices. But other than that slider, any setting that you make for SharePoint at the tenant level is the same as OneDrive.
Todd, this is something that if I'm not a SharePoint admin or not a tenant admin, I don't see, right? Which is it? I forget.
Correct. So this is the SharePoint admin page. So you'd have to be a tenant admin or a SharePoint admin to see this. I think a global admin can see it. Yeah.
Got it. So if I don't have access to this, this is the screenshot here is what I'm petitioning for generally, right?
Yeah, this is just the regular SharePoint admin page. So when you go to, I always, because of something I stole from Mark Cashman 100 years ago, whenever I'm doing anything inside of Office 365, I start at office.com. And then if I have administrative permissions, then that admin thing's going to show up. And then that takes me to M365 admin page. And then the SharePoint admin page will show up if I have access to that. And then that's where the story picks up.
Gotcha. That's the prescribed path.
I like it. When Mark started this was a SharePoint conference probably 3 or 4 years ago. He's like, I start my day at office.com. And I'm like, that is such marketing crap that I just felt dirty for him saying that. And then I started doing it and I'm like, well, that is really great advice. It is marketing crap and it's good advice. So that's how I always do it.
Not going to ask if you still feel dirty. Let's move on.
Yes, please.
There are, by the way, a couple of extra settings under that more external sharing settings, which is very almost invisible. So just don't forget to check those if you
And I didn't show those because I knew we would be pressed for time, and I knew that we covered those in the share. But that's where you can do the whole strict by domain and stuff. So yeah.
So let's drill down within the application itself. So presuming somebody's already done this, I'm within OneDrive and I want to share.
So there's 3 different ways that you can share from within OneDrive. So you can share from the folder level, which means everything within that folder and subfolders is also shared. You can share just the one-off files, or you can do a file request. So what we have some images on of the right are the 2 different ways that you can share. The first one is the somewhat current, as Mark was alluding to, share dialog, where we just got a blog out today where this is going to be shifted a little bit. And then on the right is if you are actively syncing your OneDrive, then you can also share from Windows Explorer. So if we take a peek at some of these changes, so you can see what is coming now for quick permissions and link setting is they have changed the user interface a little bit. They've shifted the order of the dialog sharing menu, and they've expanded the link settings to be an entire window on its own. This is something that is available now, though I will say I don't see it in my tenants just yet, but it was just announced this morning.
And I think, Emily, do we have a link to this in the resources? I know it just came out, so I know we will, but perfect.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. And I can pop that into the chat. Now, one thing that you can do in OneDrive right now is you can manage your access after you've done that initial sharing. So you can see from the OneDrive default view when an item is shared, and when you click on that item, it does show you the list of people who have access to it. And it shows you some of the links that are giving access. What is going to be coming later this year is a new layout to that manage access, where you can see now, again, they changed the user interface for this, where they moved copy link down to the bottom, and then they are showing you a bit more in that red box of who you've been shared with. So they're giving you all of those different head views and then an ellipses to go see more of that information. Now,
Emily, is this somewhere we would guide people, like if you don't have a user profile picture set up in M365, you might want to think about what experiences like this are going to look like. You don't.
Absolutely. And I know it can be a little bit hard to see even all of the heads from that view. So when you click the ellipses, we have a zoom in of that view where it shows it's in 3 different tabs. So we can see people, groups, and links. So it's a little bit more clear than it was before to see what has been created. So that will also be rolling out later this year.
And Emily, this is residue. Oh, sorry, Julie, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say we have a question, and the question's from Russell, and he said, "What's the maximum unique permissions per site?" And I'm not sure that I follow the site part of this since we're talking about OneDrive, but maybe he means OneDrive.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think if there was ever a maximum number
per list. He says.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I saw that too, and I didn't have an answer, so I was hoping somebody else.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that one either.
There's a technical limitation, but there's also a practical. We wouldn't advise
this is
beyond a certain amount, right?
Item level permissions to share something like that because you're breaking inheritance.
My guess is that some of the urban legend lore about document level sharing is probably falling by the wayside, because if you think about it, every time you'd use one of these sharing dialogues, you're poking a hole in that model, potentially, depending on what you choose.
I can't remember when, but I feel like not too distant future, we had somebody that had so much item level permissions that they had degradation of performance on the list. They had a huge list and they had item level permission, and it was really affecting their their performance level. So I think there probably was something like that if it doesn't exist now, but I haven't actually seen any. Well, Todd's posting, but yeah, I haven't seen any personally, any like hard and fast limit, but maybe I'm seeing 50,000 limits.
So,
Okay, so you two, can you just wake up?
yeah,
Is it
so
5,000 or 50,000?
yeah, both Em and I
Both.
grabbed links from Microsoft, and it's so I can tell you for certain on-prem breaking inheritance, which again is what this is, would just kill performance. Absolutely, that is not. I saw that 100 times myself. Part of the problem I think that you're thinking about, Julie, is we have that one customer that has a gigantic document library with 5 million items. And I think the number of items is the issue, not the permissions.
Could be. Yep. A follow up from Russell. So when we assign tasks, we typically only want when we assign tasks, we typically only want assignee to edit the task. Oh, yeah. So you're doing item level. I try to avoid it like the plague. It's just something that I just don't suggest.
Well, I mean, a task list might be a little bit different depending on how many tasks you're actually going to have. You're going to have thousands and thousands of tasks, or you're going to have hundreds of tasks. If you're doing item level permissions in hundreds, probably not a big deal.
Yeah.
It's the scalability problem.
Yeah. So, and Glenna, just to pull back, breaking inheritance kills performance for sure on-prem, but online may not be so much, because it was an issue with how the SharePoint product, 10 years ago handled that, how SQL handled it. Maybe not. So like Mark Christman's posting stuff about SharePoint on-prem, which is a different animal than SharePoint Online in this regard.
Yeah, they have re-engineered some of that for modern lists under the covers. I know there has been some re-engineering of that, so I don't know that we have a definitive answer for performance affecting, item level permissions affecting performance.
Yeah.
Online, that is. I had one more comment about this sharing. So Emily had the sharing stuff so that you could see what you've shared with whom, but there's also that view where you could see what was shared with you, which is also super, it's the reverse, but it's super handy to be like, hey, I know that person shared that thing with me, and having that shared view makes it easy to get back to that thing that was shared with you versus searching your inbox for the shared thing.
And that'll show both
We're going
SharePoint
to my
and
recent
OneDrive.
documents.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Cool. So how about within applications themselves? Like a lot of places where we're authoring or editing content, we have the ability to share from within Office applications too.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't do this. So the image that we're seeing right now is what's coming out later this year, where you're going to be able to manage access from within the applications, but you can share directly from the applications now. So that is something that if you just finish that document, no need to open up Outlook and send out an email. You can just hit that share button and then send that out as well.
I was thinking about this yesterday. I mean, when you think about it, well, I was thinking about it. Whenever you have that shared dialogue, it's because things are connected to Microsoft 365. So if you just are using whatever this is, PowerPoint, you're not going to see that shared dialogue if you're just storing something on your C drive somewhere. All of these sharing capabilities are really talking back to Microsoft 365. So for example, I had to reformat my hard drive this week. It was lots of fun. And all of those OneDrive sync points now are telling me that it can't auto save, it can't share, it can't do a whole bunch of stuff because I've lost that connection. So you always have to think about, is Microsoft 365 on the back end serving me at the moment in order to make this cool stuff happen.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of file share. I use it every day. That's how I share stuff from within apps.
And I think we did a little poll internally last week. How many of us use that, in this dialogue, fill out the email thing, to so and so, and here's the message. I don't know that I've ever done it because it goes to people and it's very contextless.
Yeah,
right?
I don't.
So we tend to grab that link and put it into an email or.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we talked about that when we were doing the SharePoint one.
Yep.
Mark, you bring up a good point about the synchronization. OneDrive still breaks sometimes. So the sync client, I was just looking at this the other day when we were prepping for this, and I realized that some of my libraries had become unsynced. Unsynced? Yeah.
Desyncified
and so I lost
is actually the right word.
Desyncified, yeah. So I had lost that little icon to do the sharing from my desktop, and that's what indicated to me that it was broken. So just keep an eye on that if you're synchronizing libraries to your desktop.
Can I just
Well, if
point
you
out
weren't
you're
on
a
that
Mac?
fruity computer, yeah, I was just gonna say.
Haven't seen
It
that happen
happens
on
on
my
PCs
PC.
too, my friend.
No,
I have not
haven't
seen
it.
that in years now. It's been stable for a
It
couple
happens if you reformat your hard drive. I can
Well,
tell
that's-
you that, but otherwise, no, I haven't seen it.
Well, it was connected to something called groove.exe or something like that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
That was
they
that.
fixed that.
Those days are long gone. Thank God.
Mm. All right, let's move on.
All right.
We'll agree to disagree that your fruity computer is fruity.
So another item that is going to be rolling out later this year is, this is again OneDrive, but we're going to have the option to share directly to Teams, which is pretty cool. So instead of just copying the link and then bringing it over to chat, you can just share that right into Teams.
I like
And,
that.
and Emily, do we know what the dialogue will look like when we click on share to Teams? Like,
No,
I'll
it's a
probably get a
mystery.
menu of my teams and channels that I subscribe to.
One would hope.
I would
One
hope
would
so.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's
We just
no
we haven't seen it yet, right?
right. There's no image in the blog article just yet, but I would imagine it's going to be something pretty awesome and intuitive.
I don't know,
Gotcha.
Or
Emily.
so I hope.
You should mock it up and let's see how far off from that it is.
Place our best guesses. I'm thinking it would look something like the OneNote when you're copying or moving and you have your notebook and then you click a plus to expand and you see all of the different sections. I'm imagining that would be Teams. You'd probably expand and then see your channels potentially.
And this thing all falls apart when you have like 50 or plus teams that you're a part of, but we'll see.
Yeah, hopefully it's way better than the move to and copy to things where you're constantly scrolling and expanding and scrolling to find whatever site it is you're trying to move to. But I digress.
Agreed. I hope it's better than that one because that one
Let's
is a
wait
little bit
until they
challenging.
release it to beat it up.
Come on, we can beat it up. Just
That's no fun.
on spec. We're beating it up on spec.
Too easy a target. All right,
So-
let's talk about requesting files.
Yeah, so I threw this one, and it isn't exactly external sharing, but it kind of is. So this is the ability, and unfortunately, it's only in OneDrive. It's not in SharePoint proper, but only in OneDrive, where you can create a folder, select that folder, and then when you select the folder, the request files thing shows up in the menu. And then you can send that out, and people that aren't in your tenant or wherever they get this nice email with this nice interface, and they can upload files. They just pop into your OneDrive. It is an underappreciated, underused thing, and I'm a big fan. And yes, I agree, Russell. I wish they would add that SharePoint.
Yeah, I agree with you too. That it seems like it'd be more useful for SharePoint, but
Yeah. So, and
What-
while we're kicking the fruity things, I did this with some family in the fall, and one of my cousins called me up and he's like, this dumb thing doesn't work. I'm trying to upload some stuff. And like he's describing it, it doesn't make sense to me. He's on a Mac. And I'm like, when did you switch to a Mac? He's like, about 6 months ago, whatever. I'm like, why did you switch to a Mac? And he's like, well, they're just easier to use. I'm like, are they? Why are we on the phone right now? Tell me more about this easier to use. Because his sister had done the thing and uploaded the stuff, and I'm like, yes.
yeah.
So while we're kicking, but yes, I love this feature. Use it all the time.
It's a good one.
You've
The
never requested
obligatory
files from
hat
me.
tip.
Sorry.
The obligatory
Mike's
hat
moving
tip
us along.
/
Come on.
nod to we got a finite time here. Let's go. To Matt Wade and team from Jump to 365 to illustrate how some of these things work together. Emily, is there something specific here that we wanted to make sure folks were thinking of?
Absolutely. So when we were talking previously about external sharing in SharePoint and Teams, this came up a lot because there's a lot of different things that come with your Microsoft 365 group that back those. We hadn't talked about all of those items. So this is just a lead in to drive our conversation around Planner and Stream, because those are some additional services that we have within Microsoft 365 available to us.
Cool.
So-
And regrettably, yeah, Emily, it sounds like the conversations around Planner and Stream are pretty short conversations.
They are. They're pretty limited. So Planner, you have to be a member of that Microsoft 365 group. You don't have a standalone plan. You don't have a visitor who's just lurking and looking at all of your tasks. It's very similar to Teams where we have owners and members only. And then in worse news for Stream, there just is no external sharing. So even though you might get that Stream group where you can be uploading all of your different videos, if you have a guest in your M365 group, an external guest, they're not going to be able to see that content. So if you have videos that you need to externally share, I highly recommend putting those in OneDrive and SharePoint. And that back end of Stream is migrating to those areas anyway, as we've already seen with those meeting recordings. So think of it as being a step or two ahead of the inevitable migration that will be coming.
This is Stream Classic.
Yeah, so Russell, I had the same when we were talking about this in the prep yesterday. The difference is new things created in Stream will be shareable, like Emily just said. This is only how things that you upload are getting saved in the back end. So this is a temporary problem. It's just, yeah. So your thinking was correct. We're just ahead of the game.
So it's a today problem.
We're wishful thinking.
Right. Until it's solved, it's not solved.
Right.
But there is some basis for hope. There's some positive things about sharing Yammer communities externally, correct?
Absolutely. So you can have those externally shared. So just when you are first creating that community, you're going to choose internal or external. So sometimes this could be a good option. Let's say you have an externally shared communication site for onboarding, and you want new employees to be able to access this site before they join the company, and you also want to have a chat space for people. This would be a great solution to embed into that comm site so people could ask questions, see other questions, and maybe even start introducing themselves to the same onboarding cohort that they are part of.
We had a comment that I'll just reread. Joy said she just noticed that create a shared library in OneDrive LeftNav also creates a new group. And I did not know that. So that's an interesting little find. Little factoid. Yeah. And Russell said another way people can create sites, which is exactly the complaint from so many people, right? Like everything you do that creates a Microsoft 365 group means you have a SharePoint site as well. From a governance perspective, this is a challenge because to Mike, exactly, because you'll end up with these sites, and if you're trying to monitor usage of the groups, and if the site is not being used because the site was created in response to something else, like this OneDrive create a group, now you have to go try to track down if the source of the thing that created the SharePoint site is actually getting used. And unfortunately, the API landscape from a developer's perspective to actually check those things is not complete. So that's more tricky than you would think it is. Not with the the major payloads like Teams and well, obviously if you're using SharePoint, you're using the SharePoint site, but Yammer is just not easily checkable. You can't tell if the Yammer group that is associated with the SharePoint site that was created is actively being used without jumping through some serious tricky hoops. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on Yammer sharing.
All right, we got a couple minutes left. Definitely want to touch on Power Platform as well.
I'll be quick here. So I was doing some research to prep for this, and so Power Apps, you are definitely able to share with people that are external users in your environment. The big thing that I ran into in my testing was that I had to be very conscious of the data sources and what was going on in that Power App. So because that user will need access to do all of those things. So if you're writing to a SharePoint list, that user not only needs access to the Power App, but they also need access to the SharePoint list that it's writing to or reading from or doing all those things. So if you have a big and complex Power App that has lots of different data connections, you do need to make sure that those users have access to those things. The same thing holds true for Power Automate. You don't necessarily, it really depends on who the connection is that created the flow to begin with. So if you're reading a trigger on when a document is added to a library, that's running as the person that created it. Now, your external user can't create a flow in your environment, but they can interact with it. So if you create it and they add a document, whatever happens in your flow will occur. They just can't create their own. And again, it all does depend on the connections. So you can't have a connection to something that they don't have access to. And what was that, Julie? You were
Oh, I'm typing in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Basically, I'm just re-explaining it from a sort of more of a programming perspective. Like Power Apps are more delegated permissions. That means whatever the user can do, they can do through the Power App. But if they can't do it, it'll fail in the Power App. And Power Automate is kind of not really, it's sort of a hybrid between an app level permission and a delegated permission. It's the permissions of the person who created the Power Automate connection that is being used. So not necessarily the person who created the Power Automate, but the user that is assigned to the connection being used is limited to whatever that user can do.
Yeah. And Emily pointed something out about Power BI sharing, and I don't know enough about Power BI to include it on a slide. So if somebody else wants to take a quick hit at that, if not, we can take that as an after item.
I got nothing. I'm so not good at Power BI.
Sounds like the next step.
Thanks for bringing it up, though, Derek.
Yeah.
This would have win if you'd just been quiet. Yeah.
That's a win.
All right. Sorry.
Painted
Hall of
into
shame
a corner.
for you. Get that dev
It
sweater.
wouldn't be the first time I've been there, Julie.
Valid. Completely valid.
So some resources across M365 that we dropped in here, kind of one-click access to sharing. We didn't have a slide on forms. Anything we want to say on forms?
You can externally share them. A lot of times I find companies that have a subscription to SurveyMonkey, and that's silly because you have forms and it can do almost exactly every single thing that SurveyMonkey can do. So if you're one of those companies, maybe reconsider and spend some time checking out forms.
Yeah,
The name of SurveyMonkey is so much more fun, though.
It is
True.
Yeah. I followed up Joy's thing about the create shared library in OneDrive. Man, what an insidious, horrible thing that is. So if you do the if you do the create shared library deal, like she said, it absolutely does create a site. But the first time you go there, it exposes it to you like it's in your OneDrive. So it's not obvious that it's another, but there's a small little button that says go to site that then takes you to the site that is the man, what a horrible idea. Yeah.
Sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Survey Donkey. I like the idea, Sherman. And do we have an answer? Do we have any insight on Krista's question about CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA features coming to Microsoft Forms?
I don't.
Yeah.
I haven't heard
Something we
anything
can.
about
It's something we can look into, but I don't think anybody knows off the top of their head.
I know there used to be something in user voice. It was one of those options in there. I don't even know if the Forms user voice is still active or not, but that's one of the things that our institution is trying to have in place before we adopt Forms as sort of a broader tool within the organization for external usage, because we get a lot of spam. We're a university, and our site gets hit a lot when we have any kind of external forms.
Interesting. Yeah,
I just thought I would throw that question out there.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything about that. I could see the challenge though.
Caleb.
Awesome. Caleb, yes.
Got a lively chat going here. Yeah.
Along with Donkey. And Catherine brought up an interesting thing. And Google has the same thing, that if you do share a Microsoft form externally, it doesn't capture who did it. So make sure you add a question that says, who are you? And don't lie, because we can, even though you can't tell.
Tell them that you can tell. Is that your IT trick?
Yep. Lie. I'm not above it.
And parenting too, right?
Yeah.
They don't know what the limits of your powers are.
You heard it first here. Parenting tips 101.
from the childless one, right? Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly. Excellent choice.
It's easy from here. I don't know how.
Oh.
All right. So the next 2 weeks from now, we're at the top of the hour. So 2 weeks from now, we wanted to really go back to our roots, right? We did stuff that's more structured over the last 3 sessions about external sharing, and we prepared a lot, we presented a lot. We really wanted to make the next one kind of hand it back to you and make it a real asks in praxis. So the next topic is ASA, asks in praxis anything. Bring your ideas. Feel free to feed them to us in advance if there's stuff we can research using the link at the bottom right of the screen. But we're keen to hear from you. And if you have ideas right now, feel free to throw them in the chat or take yourself off of mute in our remaining time. But the next one is going to be more freeform and a little bit less structured than the last few have been. Make sure we get more questions answered from y'all. Thank you, Sherman. It's really nice.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sherman,
Cool.
thanks.
So-
I'll send you that check who we talked about.
You're not supposed to tell people we do that.
So
you gotta
we'll be in the
play.
chat. We'll be on Twitter. We'll be monitoring the submission of presumably a Microsoft form for the asks in praxis. And we'll have a couple in our pocket as well, for sure, a couple of topics. But we'd love to hear what matters to you and what's important to you. So bring good questions and try to stump the geeks in 2 weeks.
That's not that hard. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great week.